brand new computer and I'm still configuring it.
You are? That, ladies and gentlemen, is Serena Catania, who just got, a week of shooting Blackmagic RAW?
Off and on, yeah. 3 days.
3 days?
Just a little bit every day. Are we on the air now?
We are on the air now. We absolutely are.
Hi, everybody.
And then we have Mr. Raw, Patrick Southern.
Hey, guys.
Patrick has had those fantastic videos from LumaForge, one specifically talking about what RAW is and one about Blackmagic RAW. So we may borrow a little bit of information from one of those, but I recommend those if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of RAW. We're not going to really do that during this live broadcast. We're going to be a little more generic and answer some questions, hopefully, people, if they ask in the chat over there on YouTube. So there's a couple of things that I had questions about. Let me pull up my list here. The first thing, when we talk about RAW, so we know that RAW is the raw data from the sensor, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So we know that. So, but that's not a video file. That's a data file.
Right. Video is processed raw. And so either your raw sensor data is processed inside of the camera and becomes video in the camera, or it gets processed in your software. And that's where we talk about having a raw video workflow. So it's not raw video, it's raw sensor data that you have access to in post-production and can essentially turn into video.
But
right.
Some people are complaining that we're calling it Blackmagic RAW when it's really demosaicing some of it in the camera itself and processing the files. Right?
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to ask, which is it really Blackmagic RAW or is it Blackmagic semi-RAW?
I mean, my take is that it is semi-raw because they even admit in their marketing that they're doing a partial demosaic.
Right.
Right. So if you go to their website and you read through the page on Blackmagic RAW, they mention that they are doing things like sensor profiling, they're doing edge refinement, they're doing noise management inside of the camera, which there's some interpretations of demosaicing that actually say that those are all parts of the process, but that there are other parts of the process like tone mapping, white balance adjustment, and adding gain and that sort of a thing. So theoretically, when they say that they're doing partial demosaicing in camera and partial outside of the camera, they're essentially saying things that are true. But the thing that's a little weird here is that, well, so how raw is raw, right? Is raw something that's completely untouched other than compression? Is uncompressed RAW the only true version of RAW, or is compressed RAW acceptable as RAW? And, if we're actually turning photo sites into pixels inside of the camera in any shape or form,
right?
Is it RAW? So that's up for debate. Color scientists that I've seen on the various RAW blogs and Facebook groups have tended to say that they don't think that Blackmagic RAW is actually RAW, but that it is using some of the aspects of RAW to make a semi-RAW format, right? Mostly with those metadata controls for exposure and white balance and that sort of a thing. So I think it's kind of like the things that everyone cares about with RAW, but technically it's not 100% RAW. But from a practical standpoint, I don't know that it really matters.
I'm calling it RAW.
Well, that's right.
I know Philip and I would have a big argument over that, but I'm calling it RAW.
A big argument over what?
Well, Philip Hodgetts, as a matter of fact, I wish we had Philip on. I should have thought of it. He really doesn't like calling this codec RAW because of the processing in the camera. And, I'm a filmmaker. So for me, as long as I get that full 4.6K images at the highest quality known to man at the moment, I'm really happy. And if it does some of the work in the camera or some of the work in post, doesn't matter to me. Now, a color scientist will have a different opinion probably. Did I just lose Richard?
Richard, his camera's off.
No,
as is his audio.
I turned myself off for a second.
Did I scare you?
No, I had to go to a timeout. Gave myself a timeout. No, that's exactly, Serena, that's exactly why I asked if it's really semi-raw. Not that it's bad, but it's a new flavor of raw that we haven't seen, because all the other camera manufacturers that I know of, they all use compression. Okay, including ProRes RAW, except for
Right.
I think Red does the only one. Maybe it's Ari. They do the only pure uncompressed output, but you need a dual HDSDI to get that, from what I understand. So compression is normal consideration for RAW. Processing it is a new thing, which maybe the other camera manufacturers are going to start doing. Maybe they'll start seeing the advantage to that. I don't know.
Well, Patrick, what do you say to people who claim that this is an incomplete color sample? And that
to people who say that it's not fully raw,
Yeah.
I say, yeah, you're probably right. I'd say that Philip Hodgetts is probably spot on. I think that, you know, there are a lot of benefits to what Blackmagic is doing that, even though it's not completely raw, it's still amazing. Like, for the fact that as soon as I brought Blackmagic RAW into Resolve, I was able to edit it as fast as I could. You know, I'm doing 4.6K, and I'm flying through it like it's HD ProRes.
Exactly. It's
so
fast.
It's extremely performant. You do have the flexibility of changing your exposure, your ISO, your white balance, all of that in post-production, which is all that really most people are going to care about. There is this tendency. The thing that's frustrating me is that people are saying, well, but ProRes RAW is really not raw, right? I'm like, no, ProRes RAW is actually fully raw, whereas Blackmagic RAW is not. But the fact that the metadata controls aren't there for ProRes makes people think that it's not raw, but really what they're saying is it doesn't have metadata controls, which is completely different than is it or is it not raw.
Absolutely. So we've been joined by Brad Olson. Hey, Brad.
Hello. Just got back from dropping my kid off at preschool, so I was listening to what Patrick was saying, and he summed it up, so I think we're good.
Okay,
No.
you can go now.
But here's the thing, Patrick. This is, you know, Apple has done just a partial rollout of ProRes RAW. I suspect they're going to be changing it going forward, don't you think?
I would hope that at some point we get metadata controls for ProRes RAW.
Right.
Not just for marketing purposes for Apple ProRes RAW, but also because I think that since 2007, when Red rolled out Red RAW, you know, Red code, we've had the ability to do metadata controls with most every new format that came out in terms of RAW.
Okay.
At least anything that was useful, right? So Cinemid DNG, you've got those controls. Red RAW, you've got those controls. With Blackmagic RAW, you've got those controls, but you don't in ProRes RAW. I do like that with ProRes RAW, you've got the ability to change the tone mapping stage, right? When you go from a linear signal to, you know, something that's going to retain all of the dynamic range within a video signal. I like the fact that inside of Final Cut, you can change that with ProRes RAW, and you definitely cannot do that, at least currently with Blackmagic RAW, or even, well, Red RAW you can. You don't see it the same way. You don't have access to the full linear signal, but you do have the ability to change things to like Red Gamma 4 or Red Gamma 3 or Log 3G10. The fun thing with Apple ProRes RAW is you can change between multiple camera manufacturers' tone mapping curves.
Right.
Anyway.
So we got some questions in the chat. Matthew Reynolds says he has a FS5 and building up to be able to shoot ProRes RAW. What type of video is going to benefit from RAW? That's a question I hear a lot. I mean, do you guys, with the majority of your shooting, do you shoot RAW all the time?
No, I mostly shoot ProRes right now, but that's just because I don't have an Atomos recorder or anything. For me, if you'd asked me a few years ago the difference between like when to shoot RAW and when to shoot ProRes in a log format, I would have said like shoot ProRes log all the time. Maybe for some people who are going straight to broadcast or something, then you'd want to shoot in a video format, like a video linear kind of format. But yeah, I would say shoot ProRes log all the time, just because it's really powerful. It retains a lot of the dynamic range. The file sizes are reasonable, and the processing is reasonable. But now that we have these two new codecs, I'm not so sure, because if they've taken care of the performance and the file sizes of ProRes RAW and Blackmagic RAW aren't that much bigger than, and even Red RAW file sizes were manageable depending on what compression ratio you used. Well, but they've nailed that performance thing, and now I'm like, well, I don't know. Once these get up and rolling, I don't know why you wouldn't want to shoot RAW if it's not going to take a hit on your computer. Again, for live stuff, for broadcast, for things like that, obviously not. But if you're doing any short film or any narrative project, I don't see the harm in picking one of these RAW flavors and rolling with it. I mean, what downsides do you see, Patrick? I don't.
If the cost of RAW isn't significant, there's no reason not to shoot RAW. But there are times where the cost of RAW is significant depending on the camera that you're shooting. So, for example, if you're shooting ARRI, there's no reason to shoot ARRI RAW in most circumstances. In most circumstances, Netflix or YouTube or broadcast, you're going to be fine with ProRes Quad 4 shooting log C. Heck, you could probably shoot ProRes 422 log C and be fine. ARRI RAW is such a costly codec, though. It's an image sequence, so it takes up a lot of processor resources, and it's also really heavy in terms of throughput. But with Red RAW, with Blackmagic RAW, with ProRes RAW, if you've got the ability to shoot those, there's not a high cost to it. But there's also not a huge benefit to it unless you're in a situation where your exposure is not super well controlled, or you're shooting something that's definitely going to need to be remastered later on. So if you're looking at doing something that needs to be remastered later on, maybe you're shooting something for the National Archives. I don't know if we know anybody who's done any of that, but
no one comes to mind.
When I first went there,
if you're shooting 3:1 at full 4.6K at full RAW, I'm only getting 11 minutes on a 260 gig card and 5 minutes on a 120 gig card. Yeah. So you have to be careful what you're using that for, right? I shot 3:1 thinking that I wanted to shoot one of the final scenes of the Chianti documentary for full screen theatrical release and see how beautiful it was going to look. Right. And I'm going to be limited. Now, if you have an outside recorder, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. But how many people that are shooting the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro really use external recorders, right? I've got a video assist now that I'm going to use on the next shoot and see how that helps.
Well, and that's
a fair point.
Yeah, Patrick and I are probably thinking the same thing right now.
Go for it, Brad.
I was just gonna say that's why the camera gives you so many different flavors, and honestly, higher compression ratios on a RAW codec are pretty good. Like, I've been pretty impressed with what Red's been able to do. And Patrick, have you tested the Blackmagic RAW higher compression ratios? And what do you? I mean, are you still getting a lot of detail in that beard when you're shooting with the Blackmagic RAW?
We actually did some tests where we blew up Q0, which is the highest potential quality. We did 3:1 and we did some 12:1, and we compared them and we blew up the image by 400%, and we didn't see any significant change in the quality. So at 12:1 compression,
you're watching on a
5K monitor.
You're not watching a big theatrical screen.
Yeah, but big theatrical screen is farther away. And we are doing 2K projection at most theaters.
And I'm looking at it at 5K, 3 feet away, blowing it up by 400%, and I'm not seeing significant changes in noise. 12:1 is fine for most scenarios. If you're doing documentary, at most I'd say 8:1.
I think people would be surprised to know how soft an image in the theater is compared, like through projection, compared to if you've got an iMac Pro at 5K resolution and you're right next to it, you're going to see a lot more detail, especially blowing it up like Patrick. So yeah, I mean, people get paranoid about it's going to be on the big screen, but the projector actually hides a lot of flaws comparatively.
I mean, Red even says to start it at a higher compression than what people would expect. You know, whenever, especially if you're shooting a high resolution, if you're shooting 4.6K, then there's not really any reason to be at above 5:1. You know, if you're shooting a higher data rate than 5:1, if you're shooting lower compression like 3:1 or 4:1 or whatever on red or anything else, you're not really going to see a visual gain. You're just going to bloat your file size at that point.
So we got another thing in the chat. Garrett says he's wondering how much RAW counts when your video is going to end up on YouTube and Vimeo.
It doesn't count.
So in that's probably, I think we'd all agree, if that's the only place your video is going to end up, you really don't need to shoot RAW. Because the other thing about RAW, no matter what flavor you use, it's more work.
Well, that's what we were talking about earlier with Blackmagic doing some of the processing in camera, and with ProRes, you know, them touting, Apple touting it has really good performance. I don't know how much more work it is if the processor can chug along and handle it.
I mean, just the fact that you got to apply LUTs, that you got to do more color correction rather than.
But a lot of that stuff can come in and be flagged automatically, and you don't even have to be very smart, and you can just. I mean, that's why.
Very true.
Like that's why, like ProRes RAW, for example, they didn't include the metadata controls. But when you're using the color corrector or the white balance tool in Final Cut, it's essentially like having those tools built into the camera, right? And so somebody who doesn't know anything, it's automatically applying. If they shot Panasonic or Canon or whatever, it's automatically applying that look, and then they just start messing with it. They're going to get benefits with RAW with being completely ignorant of what's actually happening behind the scenes. So yes, if you were having to manually click everything yourself, but they've really thought about ways to automate it for the person who doesn't know. And as far as whether or not it's a benefit to shoot on YouTube, I mean, I shoot it for YouTube. I don't see it as a benefit, a complete benefit on like a necessity on the you know, the delivery end entirely, but it depends on what you're doing. You may be making some live action animated integrated super composited short film that you're going to release on YouTube, and you're going to see the benefits of RAW when you're doing your compositing or all your color correction and stuff to get stuff to match. So, you know, it's again, it's really what the content is, not even what the delivery is, because YouTube can handle high resolutions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm delivering 8K to YouTube right now, and YouTube's taking it and displaying it. So I don't think that whether or not web requires high quality imagery is the thing that's in question. I mean, honestly, I think that formats like YouTube, Netflix, Hulu are kind of the leaders in quality right now, right?
Okay.
Because broadcast, I'll take the same video and I'll play it back on my television at home, and it looks a lot sharper and cleaner because I'm going down to 1080, right? I'm going to 1080. I'm working at lower bandwidth. Not a big deal. Whenever I'm watching something on my computer screen, I can tell a lot more whether or not it's in focus, whether or not there's compression artifacts, all of that, because I'm looking at something that's got a higher pixel density. I've got something that's got a higher brightness and contrast. So I don't know that we should ask the question, kind of like Brad pointed out, should I focus on RAW if I'm doing YouTube or whatever? The only reason to do that is, again, like Brad said, for compositing, or the other thing is if you want to save data, because honestly, a lot of these compressed RAW formats are going to take less data, especially at high resolutions, than if you did ProRes or DNX or any of those. So if you've got a computer that's able to play back something like Blackmagic RAW or Apple ProRes RAW or Red RAW, then you might actually save data. You might actually not have to spend as much on external hard drives.
That was an irony when I was calculating Red RAW at compression ratios like 8:1 and comparing them to shooting the same in ProRes 422HQ 4x4 in higher resolutions, and realizing what you just said is, oh my gosh, the data rates are actually higher for ProRes, 444 than it is for Red RAW at, at a certain compression ratio. So. But then again, the Red had the processing issue, and again, we're kind of overcoming that hump. So there's a lot of considerations, but I always think that all your technical considerations should come from a creative place. What is the content I'm capturing? You know, it wasn't wrong, like Serena pointed out, like, oh, this is a really important scene I want to get and I want to blow it up on a big screen. That's not a bad thought. I think the empowering thing for you, Serena, is to know, oh, maybe I don't have to suck up all my cards. Maybe I can get away with like a 12-1 Black Magic Raw. I would do some tests and see if if it's going to be a problem. I don't think it would be.
I'm always a little bit sensitive to what my theatrical clients are going to want, and they always want the highest quality possible as soon as possible. So that's why I was really pushing it the last week to see how far I could go with it. And when I started dropping frames in 60, I thought, well, you know what? We have to be kind. This is still a beta, and it's pretty darn good for a beta version. And I'm really happy to have it. And I mean, my personal experience with everything that Grant invents is that it's actually saved my neck when I got that hack, because his wrapper for QuickTime is a proprietary wrapper. I don't know if you guys knew that. And those are the files. Pardon me?
I did not know that.
Yeah, and the Black Magic files that I had been shooting survived the hack and stayed intact, even though I lost the metadata, and the other ones didn't. So I just really believe that whatever's going to happen in the next few weeks, I'm really excited about it, because just as a shooter, looking at it from a content standpoint, looking at it like looking at a painting, I love it. It looks absolutely beautiful, and I'm happy to have it on my Ursa Mini. So. Absolutely,
but you also have the 4K pocket cinema camera, right?
I have, but I haven't been shooting. I don't have the new one yet. I
thought you were going to get it in August.
No, they said they would have it to me in September.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
I've been traveling.
They got a few days to get it.
They got a few days left. So one of the questions we're getting in the chat, and I've heard people talk about it as well, is the difference between Blackmagic Raw and Apple ProRes Raw, since those are the two newest flavors. So there's a big difference between the two as far as not technical and which one is better, but Blackmagic Raw most likely is going to be required. It's only going to be for Blackmagic cameras most likely. Okay. Apple ProRes RAW, however, is not tied to any camera. Apple ProRes RAW can be shot with the red camera if they implement it, with ARRI, with Blackmagic if they implement it. So it's the first RAW, except for Cinema DNG, which is developed in 2008, that is vendor neutral. It does not require a specific camera. All the other flavors of RAW are tied to a specific camera. So that's a big deal. Don't you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting one to unwrap.
Did you get a chance to look at the SDK download?
I've seen that it's available. I'm not a coder, so I would have no idea what I was looking at.
Yeah,
but see, Serena, that's only for the NLE end of things, not for the camera end of things.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. So Blackmagic RAW is freely available for anybody to implement as far as on the like editing side.
On the decode side? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on the decode side. But as far as the implementation of the camera, it's a weird way to say, but it is kind of proprietary in the sense because they decided to do this in-camera processing that is sensor specific. So if you were to implement it into another camera, you would have to work with Blackmagic to figure out the best way to do the same thing they did in their own cameras. And I don't know how willing camera manufacturers are going to be to do that much work. On the ProRes RAW side of things, you got to pay Apple a license fee, and I have no idea what that is, but I would imagine
probably
that
not cheap.
But there's already ProRes
Patrick,
out there.
I said probably not cheap.
Yeah, but I'm assuming ProRes RAW is a separate license deal than just having like ProRes 422 HQ and those other flavors. So if you get a big company like ARRI saying, "Yep, we're going to implement ProRes RAW," then I think Panasonic with their VariCam will probably follow suit. And I think other camera manufacturers will consider it as well. And they'll probably do it faster because it is, in terms of a format, it is sensor agnostic because all the processing is done by the computer. Whereas Blackmagic has to be tailored. So they both have their pros and cons, and as far as who wins that battle, I don't know. I do think ProRes RAW because ProRes has this history, has a good shot of catching RE. But Apple needs to make sure that it's opened up on other NLE platforms, and it needing to make sure that the metadata tools are there in Final Cut. And so there's some things that need to happen on Apple's side, and there's some things that the camera manufacturers need to do. But I don't know. I think they both have their pluses and minuses. I would like to live in a world where I can shoot in Blackmagic RAW, edit in Final Cut, or shoot in ProRes RAW and work with it in DaVinci Resolve. I'm hoping that there's not pettiness going on behind the scenes.
Is that a joke?
People having their own
grand pettiness
wars. Yeah, some grant pettiness.
Oh,
I walked into that one, Richard.
Well, here's the thing, though. Look, people have been talking about, they're competing. They're not going to support each other's version of RAW. It doesn't make any sense for them not to. Okay, first off, they've already worked together with the eGPU. That's only available on the Apple Store, so they already work together. The second thing is, if Blackmagic does not support ProRes RAW, that is going to not help their camera sales. Nobody's not going to buy a camera. Nobody's going to, people are going to say, like you and I both, Brad, are hesitant about buying the 4K Pocket Cinema camera if it does not do ProRes RAW.
Oh, I can't imagine that it wouldn't. I mean, I've shot most of my documentary on the older Pocket camera and the various iterations of Blackmagic cameras all the way on through, and it was all on ProRes 422.
That's one of my points, exactly. Yeah. They already support ProRes. Incorporating RAW, there's not any real competition because ProRes RAW is, like I said, not tied to a camera, where Blackmagic RAW is tied specifically to their cameras.
But let's ask this very practical question from a business standpoint. Like, what benefit is Blackmagic going to see from including ProRes RAW when they've already got Blackmagic RAW? Because they want to keep people using DaVinci Resolve, and they want people to be using their cameras. So if they start using Apple ProRes RAW, what? Now people are going to use ProRes RAW in Final Cut 10 as opposed to trying to force Apple to use, Blackmagic RAW inside of Final Cut 10. I don't see from a business standpoint that they would gain any dollars or cents by doing that.
Well, but here, would they sell more cameras if they included ProRes RAW or less cameras?
I feel like from my end, if Blackmagic RAW was supported in Final Cut Pro 10, then I would give the Pocket a shot. So I think that whether it has ProRes RAW or not I would like it to, and if they said yes, it has it, I would buy it in a heartbeat. But I'd still consider it with Blackmagic RAW as long as it's supported in Final Cut. And because there's this SDK, Apple doesn't. I don't know if Apple necessarily has to create the Blackmagic RAW plugin. I think a third party could just do it, right? I mean, am I wrong about that? Because Canon makes their own plugin, Sony makes their own plugin, Red makes their own plugin.
Exactly.
So why? So even if Apple doesn't do it, somebody else will.
So he said, no, that's true. But my point is, once again, will Blackmagic sell more cameras with ProRes RAW or fewer cameras? Nobody's going to say, I'm not going to buy that camera because it has ProRes RAW.
Yeah, right? But I can't. I honestly, Richard, if Blackmagic RAW becomes available in Final Cut 10, I don't see why anyone would care. Yeah. If there's still this, head-to-head thing, honestly, I think the only reason anyone's going to care about Apple ProRes RAW on a Blackmagic camera is so that they can have RAW off of a Blackmagic camera inside of Final Cut 10. So it's a matter of do we get ProRes RAW on the Blackmagic camera, or does Final Cut 10 allow us to use Blackmagic RAW? I think in either case, one of those two things happens, and nobody's going to care which of those two things happens. They're just going to care that it happens.
What about ProRes RAW and Resolve then?
I think if Ari puts ProRes RAW and then Alexa, then Blackmagic will have to implement it. And actually, that's something I was thinking about. What Patrick was talking about was, Sorry, I blinked.
Well, for me, I'm hoping that a third party does come along and develop something for Final Cut, because I'm much more conversant in editing in Final Cut than I am in Resolve, although I'm learning Resolve now because of this.
Right.
So,
which is probably part of why they made it proprietary to DaVinci Resolve first, right? Is so that people who are using other software will start looking at Resolve. I think that's a smart business decision. And I agree with Brad that, go ahead. What were you going to say?
It popped in my head again.
Okay.
So here's why it might be a benefit to have ProRes RAW, a scenario where it might be a benefit to have ProRes RAW in a Blackmagic camera. If you look at a movie like Mad Max, where they shot on a couple Alexas, but then they got like 30 to 40 Blackmagic cameras as crash cameras.
Right.
From a post supervisor standpoint and from a cinematographer standpoint, it might be a good idea to be able to shoot the same raw format across all of those cameras. So there are scenarios where it would be a benefit. Does that benefit your average consumer who's probably buying the majority of the Blackmagic cameras? No. But there are specific high-end workflows where I could see the post facility being like, great, one format from all of these different cameras. We're bringing it all in. It's all raw, and it's an efficient, powerful codec. So there's a scenario.
Yeah, and the other benefit, Brad, that you bring up there is with ProRes RAW, unlike Blackmagic RAW, you would be able to say, okay, we're shooting these Blackmagic cameras, but we want to go from linear to log C so that people are working in log C across the board.
Yep.
So you would have that capability if you went to Apple ProRes RAW, if ProRes RAW comes to ARRI. And I think that's probably, honestly, the biggest factor as to whether or not ProRes RAW has any chance of life is, does ARRI accept and implement ProRes RAW? If not, and if we don't get metadata controls, I think that ProRes RAW is going to be more or less here for a few cameras that are using Atomos recorders. But I think Blackmagic RAW, Red RAW are going to kind of take the forefront in terms of RAW formats.
So what you just said about the recorders is interesting. A camera cannot record ProRes RAW unless it can output regular RAW of some sort.
Right, off of its sensor.
Yes, or I mean, export it out off the sensor. Right, right now, all the cameras need SDI in order to get the ProRes RAW into the recorders, except for one camera. The DJI camera records it internally, and that's amazing because that means other cameras will be able to as well.
Yes, it does mean that ProRes RAW is something that can be encoded in camera and doesn't have to be through an Atomos device. But the question of whether or not other camera manufacturers will adopt ProRes RAW is really the thing that we've yet to see. And I think that before we can see major adoption, we need to see it implemented in other NLEs. And I think we need metadata controls before anyone's going to get really excited about putting it in their camera.
Well, how long did regular ProRes take to get to be like an industry standard? It didn't happen right away, right?
It's funny that Patrick brings up the whether or not it's going to last is dependent on ARRI, because that's exactly what I remember happening. 10 years ago, we got ProRes. For me, there was a lot of question. Well, I've got XD Cam, I've got DVC Pro HD. I'm working in those codecs all the time. Why do I need another one?
Sure.
And all of a sudden in 2010, ARRI says, and we've got ProRes on board as a recording standard. And all of a sudden, I saw all the broadcasters and everybody switch over to saying, yeah, we want ProRes deliverables after that. Before that, it was, we want DVC Pro HD, we want XD Cam. And it was when ARRI made that move that we saw a huge shift. So if they did it again, then yeah, we'd see another big shift like that.
But we all want Apple and Blackmagic to work together, right? We don't want them fighting necessarily. I think we'd all rather see, Blackmagic RAW in Final Cut, maybe even natively or whatever, plug in, and we'd like to see ProRes RAW in the Blackmagic cameras. That's what we'd like to see as consumers.
Well, sure, of course.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, ProRes RAW in DaVinci Resolve.
I'm sitting here wondering why I would need ProRes RAW if I'm shooting with the Blackmagic camera and I have Blackmagic RAW. What I would like to see is the ability to be able to bring those files even temporarily. And I don't know if you guys did this, Patrick, but did you do any transcoding from Resolve back down to Final Cut with what you had shot? And so what did that? Because I'd like to try some of that this week.
You certainly could in Resolve transcode from Blackmagic Raw to a mezzanine codec like ProRes or DNX or something like that, and then go back into Resolve for finishing and access that Blackmagic Raw again for the final color grade. We didn't do that. We did our editing in Resolve.
Okay.
And had a few crashes here and there.
Well, tell me, shouldn't the version 15 of a NLE or app be less crashy?
Yeah, but
it's kind of like a house of cards.
I'm working with a beta firmware on my camera, working with the first time raw codec, and
so it's your
still
fault.
trying to. It's my fault for
crashing.
Trying to be on the bleeding edge.
Right.
I think is what it is. But hey, if you saw our What is Raw video,
it's excellent.
It's well worth it.
Awesome video.
Excellent.
Would have done it with or without Blackmagic Raw. Did it because we shot in Blackmagic Raw. So we've shot 2 videos on Blackmagic Raw, including B-roll. And I have to say, the third one we shot ProRes because we were tired of all the crashes. And I wanted to cut in Final Cut 10.
Well, were the crashes because of the ProRes Raw? It wasn't because of the 15.1 Studio, though, was it?
I don't think it was 15.1 Studio. I think it was the ProRes Raw. Well, I was mixing in Red Raw. Actually, if I'm honest, it was the Red Raw that caused the problems. And it wasn't just crashes. It was also I was getting green frames in my exports. So I had to continue.
Were you mixing the formats Red Raw and Blackmagic Raw? On the same timeline?
because on the What is Raw video, you'll notice that no, I'm sorry, that's not even true. That is Sony footage. That is XD cam footage of people shooting Red Raw. I am incorrect. It is not Red Raw. So it was actually the long GOP XD cam footage that was causing the issue, not Blackmagic Raw and not Resolve. And what ended up fixing it was creating optimized media inside of Resolve for both of those, and that fixed the problem.
So what would be benefit of shooting raw versus shooting log? Why would you choose one over the other?
Well, Brad, go ahead.
I was going to say, before I would make the argument that I would shoot log ProRes because I'm going to get better performance. The advantage of shooting raw, I would tell you, is because I got more manipulation of the sensor data. You get a lot with log, but you get everything with raw. Right. So I would say it's a performance versus this. Now, if the performance is up there and the file sizes aren't bigger, and if they're smaller in some cases, I don't know why I would shoot raw. I log. I'm actually looking forward to getting rid of log with HDR displays and stuff, because it was always a misunderstood format, and I saw so many terrible commercials that looked ugly, and people's short films and stuff that looked horrible because they would just shoot in log and then boost the saturation a little bit and warm it up, and they're like, look, it's filmic. And it's not that you can't do a flat look at all for certain things, but people were not understanding what they were shooting and what it was supposed to look like. And we saw that at the highest. I mean, I saw that on tons of TV commercials, and it was like, why does it look so terrible? And it was just because people didn't understand what the point of shooting log was. So I like the idea of that going away, and something like ProRes RAW, where it automatically applies the camera look and people still have the flexibility, and it creates less chance for people to screw it all up. So I'm excited for an HDR wide color gamut raw future. And then we output, and I'm looking forward to a future where we can output multiple formats, but we only export once, and it creates just metadata for framing, for the color space, and all the things, wherever somebody's watching it, it'll look right. And it's not like I have to create 15 different exports to do that.
Patrick had a challenge on his last video for people to go in and guess which was raw and which was log. How many people succeeded, Patrick?
Nobody's even attempted yet. So if you want a free LumaForge t-shirt, this is the shirt you'll be getting.
It's not the one you're wearing now, right?
No, I won't be
They
giving
get a
away
new
my
one.
personal shirt. Yeah, they'll be
Okay.
getting a fresh one in a sealed
I want to
package.
see you take off the shirt and package it up and put Richard's address on it and mail it out right now.
Oh my goodness. So, I mean, if you guys want to go to lumaforge.com and go to the portfolio page, check out our videos there. And if anyone can tell us what was shot in RAW, what was shot log, and what was shot standard video, we've still got plenty of opportunities for a prize. But
Patrick, you shot in film mode, right?
which one was shot in film mode?
When you did you have your camera in film mode when you were shooting the Blackmagic Raw?
Yes.
So
shot
you did
in
all
film
your grading
mode.
after the fact.
Yeah. In fact, I used, it's over here. I don't feel like unplugging it and lifting it up, but I've got the mini panel from Blackmagic, and I was able to use that to do the grade on the first two videos. And the third video, the one that just came out on macOS Mojave, I did the color grading inside of Final Cut 10. So if you look at the first two videos and then you look at the third video, you can kind of see the difference, because in both cases we started out in film mode. But yeah, it's really interesting. Having this panel really changes the way that I color grade versus doing the mouse-based color grading inside of Final Cut.
What is film mode? That's Blackmagic camera specific?
Go for it, Serena. What's film mode for those that don't know?
Film mode shoots without adding. If you look on the camera at the difference between the film mode and then you put your Rec 709 on it, it's just a whole different thing. Film mode to me is a blank canvas, and you bring it into the NLE and you color it after the fact. All the color information is there, but you don't see it until you start manipulating it. And I love it because it's very painterly, and you can do just about anything with it. And that's another reason why I'm so excited about the Blackmagic Raw, because for this particular documentary especially, I've been living in the Blackmagic arena because they're one of my sponsors, and I'm really happy with it. I'm very happy with it. Now, I know we're on beta. I know it's not perfect. I, too, had some drop frames when I'm shooting at 60. But I think that all that processing will be tweaked. We'll probably get an update fairly soon. And
Resolve puts out updates like every other week.
Yeah,
every time I turn around, there's a new update.
And I think what I am going to do is take your advice, though, and see if I can tell the difference between the 3.1 and the 8.1. Maybe I'll shoot 8.1 next time around. Yeah, because I can get more on the cards.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things about Apple ProRes RAW. They don't give us a numeric ratio like Blackmagic and Red do, like 3:1, 5:1, do they? They just give us flavors.
That's true.
Two different quality settings, which to me, I think is good enough. But there are scenarios where you might want to just use like that 12:1 on the Blackmagic, like in an event or something.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, it's funny that Q0 and Q5 and the two variations of Apple ProRes RAW are identical in terms of the compression that's being applied. So Q0 is the same as is it?
HQ,
I forget what
ProRes RAW HQ.
Yeah, so it's the same as ProRes RAW HQ, and ProRes RAW and Q5 are going to be the same compression ratio.
Do you think Q5 is higher enough quality?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think Q5 is gorgeous.
Were you recording on a video assist at all? Were you recording off camera at all, or just straight to the cards?
Straight to the card. I was using two 256 gig cards.
Yeah, I had.
We only ever used one card.
Yeah, no, I always load it with two, but I do have a video assist now. One thing I will say, if you get it, you're going to need a mini SDI to SDI. So I had to order that cable in order to make it work. So the next time I go out and shoot, I now have that cable, and I'm going to use the video assist. And I think that will really help.
Yeah. I do want to say, I've said a lot of things about how Blackmagic RAW isn't 100% raw, but I do want to endorse it as, even though it's not raw, it is fast. It's, you know, in terms of playback and in terms of exporting. And I do think that my Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro has had a major upgrade. It definitely looks better than shooting ProRes or Cinema. Well, I haven't shot a lot of Cinema DNG, but it definitely looks better than shooting ProRes. And I feel like the science that they're using for the color is better. And the flexibility in post-production is really nice. So even though it's not a completely raw format, I still think that there are a lot of benefits to it, and that people should still heavily consider using it for their productions, especially I feel like in the documentary and reality space. You know.
No, I agree. When I said it's semi raw, it wasn't as a put down. It's just a something that I noticed, that it's not pure raw, but that doesn't make any difference. If it's a great raw, it comes out great. Who cares? I mean, that's just something that other camera manufacturers may even take that up if it proves successful.
Yeah.
You know what else I like about it is you can actually screen your clips with Cinema DNG. All you had were all, you know, thousands of still images, and this is just me. I can screen it without going into the NLE using their player, and that made a big difference in terms of the speed of seeing what I had and whether or not it was working. And
oh, absolutely. I heard that people were kind of surprised when they found out that Cinema DNG RAW was actually an image sequence, right? Isn't that what it is?
Mm-hmm. Well, DNG was developed, my understanding is it was originally developed because different camera manufacturers had their different flavors of RAW on the DSLRs.
Right.
And Adobe was looking at a way to solve that problem for archiving. So they created DNG for pictures. And so a lot of photographers will take, it doesn't matter if they shot on their Canon 5D or they shot on a Nikon or whatever, we'll make it all DNG. It's a kind of an open format that, you know, 10 years from now, I'm not going to have to download that special plugin or figure out where it is, or maybe it's broken and not on the internet anymore. And then they just kind of ported that over for image sequences for video. And it was never really optimized or thought through for video the way that like Red RAW was, and now ProRes RAW and Blackmagic RAW. So it wasn't the best thing. I shot some stuff. I was shooting like a third camera on a independent feature film, and they had 2 RE cameras. So just to make sure I could get as close as I could to their quality, I shot for a day on Cinema DNG, and it ate up stuff pretty fast. But you know, I processed it through Blackmagic through Resolve, and was able to match like the frame size and everything, and it worked. But you know, everything else I've shot on the Blackmagic Cinema camera has always been ProRes 422 HQ, because I don't want to deal with that nonsense of processing every time with that image sequence.
So going forward, is everybody going to be shooting RAW all the time?
I mean, we've got 2 Red cameras and an Ursa Mini Pro, and since the cost of shooting RAW isn't that high, I think we're going to shoot in RAW most of the time. We might on the Ursa Mini Pro shoot ProRes until we get the full version of the firmware, the non-beta version. We might shoot ProRes from time to time, but we do really like Blackmagic RAW, and we really like Red RAW, so we're going to keep shooting those formats on a regular basis.
You know, something popped in my head. Maybe we're looking at this wrong for the adoption of ProRes RAW. Maybe it's not that RE needs to support it. Maybe all the iPhones, the iPhone XS and XS Max, need to support ProRes RAW, and then it'll be a thing.
Well, that's a valid point.
That would be millions and millions, but I think they got to get a new processor in order for that to happen.
Well, I've got my camera set to the Blackmagic RAW. I'm going to keep shooting as much as I can on that. It just looks really pretty. To put it in non-technical terms, it's beautiful.
No, absolutely. Really, I would expect it to be fantastic. So your experience when you've been shooting with it the last week or so, is that for your film?
No, I was testing it. I wanted to see how it worked. Now that I've seen how it works, I'm actually going to go out and shoot a scene, a pickup for my film using it.
Why don't you plug your film?
Pardon me?
Plug your film.
Oh, it's the Chianti story, the documentary about the wounded warrior that lost the leg in Afghanistan. And I've been following him for 4 years as he's tried to get on the Paralympic track team, but now he's climbing mountains. So,
oh wow!
And his whole life has changed. So we have to do just a little pickup for the ending of the movie, the happy ending.
A big pickup.
Yeah.
Brad, what about you? Are you got anything coming up?
Do I got anything coming up?
Of course, I know you do. I'm just trying to give you a chance to do a plug here.
Yeah, I'll be in New York on Tuesday. We're going to show my movie. They were testing the marquee, and they sent over a video of my name on a theater marquee in New York, and I was like, that's kind of unreal.
Hey, Brad, will you come to San Diego? I want to screen it at a theater here.
Yeah, actually, the guy, what's his name? Is it Robin? The person
Robin,
who runs the San Diego group, and we need to touch base with him. Maybe the three of us can kind of get together offline and schedule something out in San Diego.
Yeah, I'm speaking there tonight. Actually,
well, bring it up to him. Say I talked to Brad today. He's still down for bringing his movie by. So
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm speaking to that group tonight, so I'll be seeing all of them.
So Patrick, what makes the determination whether you would shoot in log or shoot in raw? Is everything going to be raw going forward for you?
I mean, like I said earlier, I think we're going to be shooting a lot of raw just because the cost isn't very high.
Okay.
For us, I mean, I also work at a storage company, so if storage was an issue.
What storage company is that?
LumaForge.
The jellyfish.
I thought you were a workflow solutions company. Is that?
I mean, that's true. I mean, don't tell anybody, but we do have a piece of software that is on the App Store now called ShotNotes X.
Did you guys buy that outright from Kevin, or?
Patrick, you got quiet there for a minute.
I mean, Kevin.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm supposed to be making any official announcements, but yeah,
we're getting Patrick in trouble. So you bought. How do you say Kevin's company? Kyoto. What is that called?
Copto Studios. Well, ShotNotes is now a LumaForge product, so go buy it. Anyway.
Are you making any other acquisitions you can talk about at this time?
Not that I know of, but so that is now a LumaForge product. Go check it out. I think it might still say Copto on the App Store. I don't know, and I frankly don't care that much because it's still just a cool piece of software. But Richard, to answer your question, I think another differentiator that people need to know about RAW versus log and when to use RAW versus log is RAW does give you a little bit more in terms of latitude and highlights because you're working in linear as opposed to a log where you're taking, this full linear signal and bending it into video space.
Right.
So you do get a little bit more latitude in the highlights. The other reason to shoot RAW, especially with ProRes RAW and Red RAW, is I mentioned in one of my videos, IPP2 color science includes new debayering algorithms that make footage look sharper because you've got that original sensor data. You can do that, right? You've got those original photo sites going from, and I've got to make this correction. In my video, I say that 4 photo sites become 1 photo site. That's not true. Algorithms are used to take those 4 photo sites and turn them into 4 different pixels. So there's a lot of averaging and edge refinement that happens in that process that happens right now inside of the Blackmagic cameras. So that's one of the downsides is you don't have those algorithms happening in post-production, which means that if Blackmagic makes changes to those algorithms later, which could help increase sharpness or change the way that gradients are handled, that sort of a thing, that's only going to apply to new footage shot on Blackmagic. However, with Red and with ProRes RAW, those algorithms can change at any time, and those can be updated in software. So in post-production, you can take old footage and make your footage look sharper. So it's less about latitude and color and more about noise handling, the way edges and gradients and all that sort of thing are handled. So those are the real benefits to RAW.
I would flag a point of this, and it's probably more in favor of the Blackmagic RAW half kind of debayer processing. I would say most of the time I'm not very interested in looking at old footage. And maybe that's just because I feel like every year, whatever, I don't know how often, but I get a little bit better at shooting. It's also projects I just don't want to go back and look at. So I agree that especially if you were like selling stock footage, or there's definitely cases where going back would help. But I think most projects, it's not that I guess I'll put it this way. It's not that big of a deal to me to go back and look at and reprocess my old footage because I don't want to bother with that. Moving forward,
Brad, so
there are
so
cases
off-
for it, but I'm just saying for me, there's not. And moving forward, Blackmagic could improve what they do in the camera, so your new footage could have that advantage.
They absolutely could.
I'm just saying
it
shouldn't be a deal breaker because most of the time you don't need to do that, but there are some people who do.
Well, I'll say this, Brad. Footage that you shot, that's being done right now. The footage that you and I shot when we were at IBC, it was pre-IPP2. I am now applying IPP2 footage or IPP2 color science to our footage, and I am seeing increases in sharpness, decreases in noise, and I'm cutting brand new videos using those same interviews and that same B-roll. So as much as you say you don't see any need for it in your workflows, well, whether you like it or not, your workflows are making use of it.
There you go.
I'm not saying there's no advantage. I'm just saying it's not a total deal breaker. If I got the project done,
I agree.
And it was done in that, I'm probably not going to bother with it. But
I agree, it's not a deal breaker. But for people like James Tonkin who are doing stuff for like the Rolling Stones or for Disney or for Fox or any of these people who are doing films now that they're going to remaster later so that they can sell again, absolutely they need to be able to shoot in RAW.
Yeah, it's like busting out the old negative but it hasn't deteriorated, hopefully, and it gets new life.
Exactly. That is the difference with shooting digitally and shooting in RAW is you've got 100% of the original negative and you can improve upon it because of changes in the way that we're processing RAW sensor data.
So, well, one of the great things about Blackmagic RAW is that they applied it to all their existing cameras, not just cameras coming out. It's like getting a brand new camera almost, isn't it,
yes.
Serena?
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Was it a firmware plus that was in the new code? The new codec was in the firmware? Or?
Yeah, I just updated it to 6.0 in the camera, and
Yep.
it came with it. And actually, I wish I had done it because we shot 8 interviews in the matter of 2 days, and I hadn't upgraded my camera. I wish I had because we could have shot all those in RAW as well. It would have been beautiful.
Right.
It still looks good.
Absolutely. So going forward, the Blackmagic RAW versus Apple ProRes RAW, they both have their places. They both are definitely a step up from what existed prior to either one of them. And we want to see Apple and Blackmagic work together on those. I mean, have Blackmagic support ProRes RAW in their cameras, at least some of their cameras, and then Apple, if they don't develop their own plugin, Apple supports Blackmagic RAW and Final Cut.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the bigger deal would be that their respective NLEs would support the RAW codecs. I don't necessarily I don't as much need ProRes RAW to be in a Blackmagic camera. But if Blackmagic RAW could come to Final Cut and if Apple ProRes RAW could come to Resolve, then that would be great.
Yeah, I would be happy if I could use Blackmagic RAW in Final Cut. That would make me really happy with the projects that I already have going. And going forward, I'll be learning Resolve, but I still have clients that are on Final Cut. So,
yeah,
absolutely. So did you guys see that new full frame camera that Panasonic announced?
I saw you post a picture of it.
There's a couple of things.
I haven't shot with it.
No, I know. It's not out yet, but they announced a full frame 35 millimeter cameras. I'm sure they're going to be expensive, but they're using a new lens mount. Is it the L something?
Just like another lens mount, just what we need, right? It's crazy.
Listen, when I buy a camera, the lenses that I have are a big determining factor in what I'm going to buy because I already have like 6 lenses. So,
yeah, you probably spend more on lenses.
Exactly.
So another one about lenses.
Serena, we're all going to the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit. What about you?
I might. I'm still on the fence.
They should have you as a speaker.
They should.
Absolutely.
I wish if they would, I'd be happy to.
I'll turn your name in because you have a lot of things to talk about, the whole Blackmagic thing and other things as well. So.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that would be fun. It'd be fun to see everybody too.
Well, even if you can't, how close are you to Cupertino?
Hours.
I probably would carpool maybe with Philip and Greg if they would let me. I'm sure somebody's going there.
Well, why don't you go with their company?
Well, with Lumberjack, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think I'll probably get there. I am
Lumberjack is a platinum sponsor, so
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I'll tell you, I'm trying to go to fewer conventions right now because I when I get in the middle of my editing and I'm doing the first cut on that documentary finally after the difficulties of the last couple of years. Brad, you understand this. So I'm trying to stay home more than in the
Well,
past.
I will say this isn't a convention. This is a family reunion.
It is.
Yes.
It is.
The other thing is,
Brad, right?
Huh?
yes, he is.
I'm going, yeah.
His wife's having the baby early so he can get there. That was part of the deal.
Actually, she is having the baby. She's scheduled for an induction a week earlier, and they moved it back. So it all makes it work out a lot better.
But
Nice.
Serena, you can just come up for Friday because that's when they're going to announce Final Cut Pro 10.5. You want to be there for that.
I'll probably, you know me, I'm curious and a journalist on top of everything else. I'm going to want to be there for the whole time.
All right. Anything else we want to promote? We want to promote Patrick's fantastic videos that he did. One on what is the Raw, and the other one was on Black Magic Raw, right?
That's correct. Yeah, head over to youtube.com/c/LumaForge, or just search LumaForge on YouTube. And we've actually started a new series that's temporarily being called Edit Bay A, where we go through subjects like what is Raw or Mojave, or we've got one coming up on Avid DNX uncompressed.
Wow.
Yeah. What do you think about Mojave right now? This is kind of I haven't upgraded yet, but
yeah, I wouldn't upgrade quite yet, but the eGPU for Final Cut 10 thing sounds amazing.
Yes, finally.
well, are they going to do other third-party eGPUs with support as well, not just Blackmagic one?
I mean, I don't know that they support just Blackmagic right now anyway. I think you could probably use any number of eGPUs. I think it just so happens to be that Apple sells the Blackmagic eGPU through their retail stores.
I
They're
do
the only
understand
seller of it.
the recommended eGPUs are all AMD, though. They haven't added support for NVIDIA. Is that right?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, I think so.
I just the ones that Apple recommended before even the Blackmagic were all AMD, and then Blackmagic's is an AMD, and it would be nice to see some more choice in graphics cards.
So we have a comment. We want to say something about CinemaGrade, the new tool just came out.
Oh, I was going to mention that.
It looks awesome. Denver's. I'm excited for Denver. I'm gonna go. We've scheduled. Well, we're scheduling a little party to go up to his house. He's in Utah, but he's north of me, and he's built a big house by a lake. So I'm gonna go party there and talk to him about CinemaGrade.
Yeah, I've been waiting for CinemaGrade for a long time. Like the idea of CinemaGrade is amazing. I haven't downloaded it yet because I had to do MObject 2 first.
Right. Well, tell us about why you think CinemaGrade is why you want to use that specifically. Just from the hands-on approach.
Yeah, the hands-on approach, the ability to touch the image and grade the image by hand. My favorite grading environment pre-CinemaGrade. Well, I don't know if CinemaGrade will be as great as I think it's going to be, but my favorite experience with grading before that was Express Dailies from Colorfront. Because it was a situation where you're full screen with your image and you use your left hand to select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, 1, 3, and 5 for shadows, midtones, and highlights for Luma, 2, 4, and 6 for shadows, midtones, and highlights for color. And you just click one of those buttons and you click and drag with the mouse and drag either left and right to change exposure or in the direction of a color on the color wheel to change the color in those areas. And it was just intuitive and easy to use, and I was looking at the image full screen and it was beautiful, and I felt like I was being more of an artist and more of a painter with color than I was spending all my time looking at the waveforms and vector scopes and being very technical with my grade.
There you go.
Well, what I think is really cool about CinemaGrade 2 is the potential, as long as Denver's patented some of this stuff that he's doing specifically. Imagine that coming to your iOS device and being able to do that with your photos. I think there's a ton of potential for people who, everyone likes to retouch their photos, but if these tools were available on a touch device, I think everyone would want to use it.
I want it to be on an iPad and to be a control surface for Final Cut 10.
Yep.
I want them to find a way to.
And that was the big problem. The big hurdle is if you had a control surface. I always, imagine this. So if you had a control surface on your iPad, then you'd have to look down to touch the controls and then look back up. But with Cinema Grade, you could just look at your iPad and you're looking at the image too. Sorry, cut you off, Patrick.
No. I'm sorry. I'm jumping in on your conversation, interrupting you. Sorry about that. Guys, I do need to head out. But it's been good hanging out with all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So before you go, Patrick, somebody said, how do you enter the contest on LumaForge for the t-shirt?
That's very easy. You go to our YouTube channel, go to the What is Raw video, and put your answer to the question in the comments section of that video. So again, the full process is go to lumaforge.com, go to our portfolio page, go to the various case studies that we have there, watch through a few of the videos. You don't have to get every single one right. But no, I am going to stipulate. You have to go and get every single one of these right. Which ones did we shoot in RAW? Which ones did we shoot log? Which ones did we shoot in standard video? First person to get all of that right, put it into the comments section of the What is Raw video, will get a free LumaForge t-shirt. And it's not that many videos. It's like 5 or 6 or 7. You don't have to watch the entire video to pick up on what format we shot in.
And Patrick, what does a LumaForge t-shirt retail for?
It retails for you can't get it except for in this contest. So,
there you go.
So 20 years from now, we'll be wearing our LumaForge t-shirts and we'll be saying, I knew you win.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for coming on today. I hopefully we see everybody there at the Final Cut Pro Creator Summit. We're going to get to go to the Spaceship Campus, even though it's in both campuses, the old one and the new one.
It's going to be really exciting, I think.
The whole afternoon, Friday afternoon, from like after lunch all the way to 5 o'clock or 5:30. And I'm sure they're going to announce something.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard. Bye, Patrick.
Thank you.
Brad.
See you guys.
Thanks everybody for showing up, stopping by. We'll be doing more of these as we get closer to the summit. Maybe the next one we'll do for the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Bye.